Welcome to the segment 3 of the LDAP operations. So if you look at the whiteboard there, we have a suffix by the name dc is equal to fedg comma dc is equal to com. Below that we managed to build two branches. One is organizational unit finance and the other one is organizational unit engineering. We used ldif file to load the data into the directory server. ldif is a textual representation of the data that exists in the directory server. Once I use the ldif file, the data is now in the Berkeley DB database. I do not need that ldif file any longer. Now that we have the branches in place, let us go and add users into the directory server. So maybe I'm going to add the user by name Sam Carter in finance. That's the user I'm planning to add. So let's say I have a user by name Sam Carter, which is the user I'm going to add in OU is equal to finance. Again, to do this, we will use the ldapadd command. We will build an ldif file for this purpose, but this time the ldif file is not going to have the dn about the organizational unit, but it will have Sam Carter. But before I go ahead and run this command, let's go to the system. We would actually need to figure out what are the different attributes that exist for a person. So if you remember, we went into the etc OpenLDAP schema core.schema. This was the schema that defines all the attributes and the object classes. Remember what I told you? If you're planning to use an attribute, that attribute should be defined in the schema, and all the attributes are defined under object classes. So obviously you will have to specify the object class followed by the attributes you intend to use. Let's open the schema that is included in our LDAP server, because we are expected to use the attributes defined in this schema only. I'm going to find out, since I know the object class, I'm looking at an object class named person. If you look at the object class there is an object class named person which defines a set of attributes like this. It says user password, telephone number, see also, description. These are the attributes, but it should have SN and CN. So you should have the attributes surname as well as the common name if you are using this object class person. So one thing is very clear: when we are building the profile of a user in the ldif file, I will first mention the DN, that is the position of that user in my DIT. Then I will define the attributes of that user, but while I do so, I will also have to mention the object class that defines the attribute. So everything is clear to us. The object class that defines these attributes is person. The attributes that I am expected to use, one of course is SN, the other one is CN. I could use telephone number, user password, see also, and description there. So now that we are clear with the object class and the attributes that exist inside the object class, let's create a file called addsam.ldif, because that's the name of the user we are trying to add. Like I said, the ldif file normally would start with the dn, so I would say dn. In case if you want, you can put a comment and say I can put a comment by using hash here. This ldif file is created for Sam Carter. That's up to you to define a comment there. The hash entry is going to be treated as a comment. Then I can say I want to add a user, dn colon, I would say common name cn is equal to Sam Carter, and then I would say I want to create that under the finance organizational unit. If you remember the DIT that we used in the whiteboard there, the position of Sam Carter is under OU is equal to finance, and I would say DC is equal to fedg comma DC is equal to com. Again, you can think of the rule where you traverse from the entry all the way up to the suffix there, which is what is happening here. Sam Carter is located in OU is equal to finance, and you navigate all the way up to the suffix, which is fedg DC is equal to com. Now that we understood this, let's define a couple of things here. One is the object class. Of course, I have to define the attributes. So what attributes define the object, what are the attributes that I'm going to use, which is CN and SN, which object class defines those attributes? You would remember it is person. You observe that in the schema there. Object class person defines the attribute. What's the surname? Let's say it is Carter. What's the common name? Let's say it is Sam Carter. So I'm going to add this user into the directory server there. So again, if you look at the pattern of the ldif file, it's straightforward. You specify the DN, the position of the entry in the DIT. Then you specify the attributes. Of course, these attributes have to be well defined in the schema there. When you define these attributes, you have to also make sure that you include the object class that defines this attribute. If you do not do that, you try to add this ldif file into the directory server, you try to load the data into the directory server using this ldif file, it's going to give you some object class violation error. So I'm going to save this file. Let's have a look at this file one more time. That's cat add sam.ldif. That's the ldif file. The first line is going to be ignored because it's a hash, it's a comment. The DN, that is Sam Carter, is going to be added under OU is equal to finance, DC is equal to fedg, comma DC is equal to com. Then you have object class, that's the object class definition. The name of the object class is person. We verified that in the schema.ldif file, or core.schema file that defines attributes such as SNCN, which is a mandatory attribute. Then it defines additional attributes as well, which is telephone number, user password, which could be used. May was the keyword that we found there. So we're not going to use that to start with. Maybe when we run the ldap modify command in the next segment, that is when we would probably end up using the telephone number or whatever you would like to use. So I have this ready with me. I'm going to run the ldap add command, but before that, let's do an ldap search. So let's go ahead and run the ldap search command here one more time. Secret is the password. So what do we have? We have DC is equal to fedg, comma DC is equal to com, which is the suffix. Below that you have a branch, OU is equal to finance, and then you also have OU is equal to ENG, which is what you see in the output of the ldap search command. Let's clear the screen and do an ldap add -d, that is the bind DN, the DN that I would like to use to authenticate myself to the directory server, which in this case I'm going to use DC is equal to fedg, comma DC is equal to com, which happens to be the top level administrator. I specify the password secret, and then I specify the ldif file, which is Sam's information. So let's see what happens. You get a message that says a new entry was added into the ldap server. And by the way, I have to mention here, after this the ldif file has no role to play, because very often people who sit through the discussion on the LDAP generally get confused that the ldif file is still required. That's not the case. I know it's screamingly obvious, but there are situations where people get fairly confused about this. So that ldif file's role is over. Even if I remove that ldif file, Sam's entry, Sam Carter's entry, is already there in the directory server. In the database, that is the BDB database has Sam Carter's entry. You don't need the ldif file anymore. I know it's obvious to many of you, but then so as to avoid a potential confusion to a lot many others, I'm just mentioning that here. Let's run the ldap search command one time and see what happens in the output. Now you can see one more entry, the entry that says now I have Sam Carter. Where is it? It's under OU is equal to finance, DC is equal to fedg, DC is equal to com. It's a person object class. That means it has attributes like SN and CN, which was supposed to be mandatory attributes. Of course, you could add telephone number, you could add user password, etc. But we didn't do that in this segment. We'll probably do that when we modify the existing entries here. Now that finance is populated with entries like this, let's go back and let's say I want to add a couple of entries under engineering department also. So let's say I want to add a couple of users here. One of course is John Doe. We can't have a directory server without John Doe existing in it. Or maybe we would also have Harry Miller as the users in the engineering department. I'm going to show you something that is very important here. So John Doe and Harry Miller, two users, are going to be added under the engineering department. So let's go back to a machine, and then we create a new ldif file, add user eng.ldif, add user underscore eng.ldif, and then I'm saying I don't want a comment, so I'm saying dn, the cn is equal to Harry Miller. And where do you want it? Under eng, dc is equal to fedg, comma dc is equal to com. What are the attributes I would like to use? Cn, that's Harry Miller. I also would like to use sn, which is Miller. And of course, these two attributes are defined in the object class, which is person. So I need to mention that. Now I'm leaving one line there. which actually is an indication. The ldif format says that there is one more entry inside this file. Every entry in the ldif file is separated by a space, a line, a new line. So you can see that I've left a line in the middle. Now I'm going to add the second entry, which is dn. Cn is equal to John Doe, OU is equal to ENG, DC is equal to FetG, DC is equal to com. Then I'm saying Cn is John Doe. Then I have Sn as Doe, and then I would say the object class that defines this attribute is person. So far we used ldif file that had only one entry in it, which is not a practical solution for loading bulk users into the directory server. So an ldif file in practical scenarios would have multiple entries in it, each of the entries separated by a new line there. Like I mentioned in the segment 2 that there are tools which can generate the ldif file for you. Maybe there is a HR database which has millions of users. You could actually export the data from that HR database in the form of ldif file, so that with minor modification using scripts written in using Perl, you could just go and import that into the directory server there. So now that I'm adding a couple of users here, let's run the ldap search command one more time to see how many users gets listed. As you can see, there is only one user, which is Sam Carter. We're going to add a couple of more users, but this time it is going to be under the OU is equal to engineering department. So let's run the ldap modify command there, ldap add command rather. This time the name of the file is add user underscore eng.ldif. Let me go ahead and do that. You can see that two entries were added. It identified the file to have two separate entries because there was a line that separated two entries, a new line separated two entries. I can show you that file one more time. That's the file. It had two entries. Those two entries, you can see that the entry was identified by the dn, but then each of the entry was separated by a new line. So in a practical situation, you would have millions of such entries in a text file, which is what you would be using to bulk load the data into the directory server. So we have it. We'll perform the LDAP search operation to verify that we have users now. So let's run the password there. Yeah, I knew it was wrong. Run the password there. You can see that there are two users. One is Harry Miller, the second is John Doe, and these two users are under the OU is equal to ENG branch and not OU is equal to finance branch. Let me show you the pictorial representation of whatever we observed in the directory server LDAP search. It was actually showing you this tree structure in the ldif format. So hierarchical tree structure is how the data is represented in the directory server. Its textual representation is what you get when you run the LDAP search command. So one of the key observations you might have made here is that the LDAP search is actually giving you the results. It's displaying the results exactly in the form of ldif. So that gives you some hints that you can actually use this output, redirect this output to a text file, modify that text file to add more and more entries into it. So you can always redirect the output of the LDAP search command to get a text file, which is actually an ldif syntax, and then you can make appropriate modifications in case if you would like to reuse the existing data in there. So that takes us to the completion of the segment number 3, which took our discussion to the next level of adding more and more users. So now I have a decent LDAP population, directory server population, which we could work on in the next segment. In the next segment, we're going to discuss about the LDAP modify command and modify the existing entries in there. So please make sure that you get used to the ldif file as well as you get used to the LDAP add command, so that you would be very, very comfortable working on the LDAP modify command. So see you in segment 4 very, very soon.